How's everybody doing? This is Anthony Brown Logan, and today we got to talk about this new FBI report that's right in front of you. We're going to go through the whole thing, and as you can see, the headline says Black Identity Extremists, also known as BIEs, we'll talk about that a little bit later, likely motivated to target law enforcement officers. Now, this is an excellent report that has been released. There's a few articles about it. I'll link in the box below. But this is great because it really identifies what's going on with, the Black Lives Matter kind of people, the Moorish people, the sovereign citizens, a lot of people that are out there that target police officers and really regular civilians as well. We don't want to talk about that. It's kind of like off limits. If you talk about it, you're racist or you're a coon or you're Uncle Tom. But this is what's going on. Just like you have white supremacists, you have Mexican gangs, you also have black gangs and also Black Identity Extremists. Those who use politics as an excuse for their really antisocial behavior. So what I'm going to do right now is go ahead and read it with you. I've not read the entire thing yet. I've kind of skimmed through it and I've seen articles about the situation, but we're going to read it together. It's not so long that you're going to be here for years, but we're going to go through it and see what it says. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. The FBI says it is very likely Black Identity Extremists, or BIE for short, perceptions of police brutality against African Americans spur an increase in premeditated, retaliatory, lethal violence against law enforcement and will very likely serve as justification for such violence. The FBI says it is very likely this increase began following the 9th August 2014 shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. I've been saying that for years. I said that all this violence, all the riots, all of that started when Michael Brown got shot and the Ferguson, Missouri situation happened. And then it was Baltimore, Maryland with Freddie Gray and so on and so on. It spurred originally from Michael Brown in 2014, but let's keep going. And the subsequent grand jury November 2014 declination to indict the police officers involved, the FBI assesses it is very likely incidents of alleged police abuse against African Americans since then have continued to feed the resurgence in ideologically motivated violent criminal activity within the BIE movement. Let me move up a little bit here for you. The FBI assesses it is very likely some BIEs are influenced by a mix of anti-authoritarian, Moorish, sovereign, citizen ideology, and BIE ideology. The Moors, these are the guys that wear like the red cup-looking hats on their heads. And these are the guys, I know you probably seen that video on Facebook where the guy was, praying in his car with his girl, talking about you don't have the authority to arrest me, that kind of stuff. You see a lot. And I'll place some videos of that in the description box below so you're able to see what I'm talking about if you're not quite sure what I'm saying here. The FBI has high confidence in these assessments based on a history of violent incidents attributed to individuals who acted on behalf of their ideological beliefs, documented in FBI investigations and other law enforcement and open source reporting. The FBI makes this judgment with the key assumption the recent incidents are ideologically motivated. Absolutely. Let's keep going. And here's the sources right here. Or this is just, what it is. I'm gonna read this right here. B, the FBI defines Black Identity Extremists as individuals who seek, wholly or in part, through unlawful acts of force or violence in response to perceived racism and injustice in American society, and some do so in furtherance of establishing a separate Black homeland or autonomous Black social institutions, communities, or governing organizations within the United States. This desire for physical or psychological separation is typically based on either a religious or political belief system, which is sometimes formed. And when we say religious, you're talking about Nation of Islam for the most part, but NOI guys aren't always that bad, but sometimes they do get that bad. But also you got guys like in Moorish, more science, they kind of get into religion as well, but let's keep going. Which is sometimes formed around or includes belief in the racial superiority or supremacy, the mere advocacy of political or social positions, political activism, use of strong rhetoric, or generalized philosophic embrace of violent tactics may not constitute extremism and may be constitutionally protected. The FBI defines sovereign citizen extremists as individuals who openly reject their U.S. citizenship status, believe that most forms of established government authority and institutions are illegitimate, and seek, wholly or in part, through unlawful acts of force or violence to further their claim to be immune from government authority. That's what I was talking about. It's like, you have no authority over my person. Yes, they do. You are in the U.S. You got to follow our laws. It doesn't matter where you think you are right here in the U.S. and you're under the jurisdiction of the U.S. But let's keep going. The mere advocacy of political or social positions, political activism, or use of strong rhetoric or generalized philosophic embrace of violent tactics may not constitute extremism and may be constitutionally protected. All right, let's keep moving. All right. Hold on, let me get you. This intelligence assessment focuses on individuals with BIE ideological motivations who have committed targeted, premeditated attacks against law enforcement officers since 2014. This assessment does not address BIEs who have attacked law enforcement officers during the course of officers' routine duties, such as responding to calls and traffic stops in which violent actions were reactionary in nature. This assessment addresses the following key intelligence questions. To what extent are BIEs targeting interests retaliatory? What cross-programmatic relationships influence the BIE movement? This assessment is the first FBI analytic intelligence product to assess influences between sovereign citizen extremist movement and the Black Identity Extremist movement. The FBI has previously reported on BIE retaliatory violence against law enforcement in two products, both of which had findings consistent with this assessment. The 23rd March 2016 FBI intelligence bulletin entitled U/FOUO Black separatist extremists call for retaliation in response to police involved incidents could incite acts of violence against law enforcement. That's right on it. See, the FBI didn't know what's going on. You know, the average normie, the regular person that watches MSNBC, CNN, or whatever, they don't really know. All they know is what they feel and how they feel things are and what they think the world should look like through their normie colored lenses. But the actual people on the ground, the law enforcement, the FBI, the military, they know what's going on. So this is right on it. I've been saying this for a long time, and it's good to see that the government is on the same page with me, but let's keep going. Assess incidents involving allegations of law enforcement abuse and related legal proceedings will likely lead to BSE calls for violent retaliation and incite these domestic extremists to commit violent acts against law enforcement. The 14th November 2014 FBI intelligence bulletin titled U/FOUO Potential Criminal Reactions to Missouri Grand Jury Announcement assessed the announcement of the grand jury's decision in the shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson will likely be exploited by some individuals to justify threats and attacks against law enforcement and critical infrastructure. Yes, that's right on it. They knew that it was going to be some kind of riot situation. They knew that you would have the Black Lives Matter and other extremist groups come in to try and basically feed off of what was going on there to push whatever narrative they want to push, whether they want to be out there to destroy, maybe they want to be able to get some camera time or whatever it is. They want to use that situation as a springboard for whatever they want. I was saying that back then, and I've said it throughout all the other riots and stuff like that that have happened. And again, they know what's going on. They right on the same page with me. So it's good to see some validation and some vindication from the government, who has much more in the way of resources than I do to be able to figure out what's going on. Reporting in this intelligence assessment was derived primarily from FBI law enforcement investigations and open source reporting, media interviews with subjects, such as posting on social media accounts and online news articles deemed credible and reliable. The review of FBI investigations occurred between September 2014 and December 2016. The open source reporting was current as of 17 January 2017. Statements made by the subjects to law enforcement during the course of investigations were particularly helpful to identify motivations behind BIE attacks against law enforcement. Because ideological motivations are infrequently identified or collected, additional reporting on the ideological motivations behind BIE attacks would improve the confidence levels in this assessment. Let's keep going. Suspects' grievances very likely lead to violent targeting of law enforcement. The FBI judges it is very likely BIE perceptions of police brutality against African Americans have become organizing drivers for the BIE movement since 2014, resulting in a spike of BIEs intentionally targeting law enforcement with violence. In all 6 targeted attacks since 2014, the FBI assesses it is very likely the BIE suspects acted in retaliation for perceived past police brutality incidents. Even though 5 of these attacks occurred following controversial police shootings of African Americans by white police officers, BIE targeting of officers was not in every incident based on their specific race. Yes. I mean, everybody knows this, and I've been saying it. It's like, every time some black person gets shot by a white person, especially if they're a police officer, that's when everybody wants to go out there and riot. Again, I'm glad that the government understands what's going on. It's good to see that we're not blind. It's good to see that people actually understand what's going on and they're not just, going by their emotions. Now we're going to name specific people and specific cases and break down what's going on. We're going to start first with Micah Xavier Johnson. On 7 July 2016, Micah Johnson ambushed and shot 11 law enforcement officers, killing 5 in downtown Dallas, Texas, during a First Amendment protected protest. Before being ultimately killed by police, the 5 deceased officers were white. The planned public event was protesting recent officer-involved shootings of African Americans in Louisiana and Minnesota. I think that was Philando Castile. In Louisiana, that was Alton Sterling. Based on Johnson's journal writings and statements to police, he appeared to have been influenced by BIE ideology. Of course, like right when it happened, I think one of the officers said that he was upset because of Black Lives Matter. Now, you have some guys on Twitter talking about, oh, he was upset due to Black Lives Matter. He was trying to retaliate against them. No, he was upset because of what had been going on with Black Lives Matter, and what they were talking about really just kind of triggered him, right? That's what's going on. It wasn't because he did not like Black Lives Matter. That's just a false narrative that's been made. During standoff with the police, Johnson told police negotiators he was upset about recent police shootings and white people and expressed a desire to kill white people, especially white officers. Johnson searched and liked social media pages of BIE and black separatist groups and had been ousted from a local BIE group for being too radical, according to an open source news website. I heard about that as well. A news article, pardon me. On 23rd October 2014, Zell H. Thompson attacked 4 white New York Police Department NYPD officers in Queens with a hatchet. 1 officer received injuries to the arm, and a 2nd officer received an injury to the side of the head. The 2 remaining NYPD officers at the scene shot and killed Thompson, according to open source reporting. I remember that. According to open source reporting, Thompson was angered after a recent spat of deaths at the hands of police. In his own writings, Thompson advocated for armed struggle against the oppressors and mass revolt against the U.S. social, economic, and political systems, which he perceived to be white dominated. He also described the United States as a beast and called for chopping off its head, hands, and feet. NYPD observed tattoos on Thompson's body that indicated he was affiliated with black separatist extremist groups, and pocket litter indicating he may have been associated with another black separatist group, according to law enforcement reporting. Convergence of BIE and Moorish sovereign citizen ideology very likely leads to violence against law enforcement officers. The FBI assesses it is very likely a few of the BIEs who have targeted law enforcement since 2014 were influenced by more than one ideological perspective. The FBI judges it is very likely in 4 of the 6 BIE attacks against law enforcement since 2014 that perpetrators were motivated by a mix of BIE ideology and Moorish sovereign citizen extremist ideology, a category of SCE ideology. The FBI says it is very likely BIE adoption of a Moorish SCE identity reinforce a sense of disenfranchisement from society and a perception that the criminal justice system is unjust. Now, if you don't know about Moorish science and stuff like that, what that is like a group where, it's kind of hard to explain, but like I said, they wear the hats and all that kind of stuff. They say they're not really part of American society. They're sovereign citizens. They can do whatever they want. They're not under the laws of the United States. And then you have the extremist people that say that we need to go out here and kill white people. We need to kill police. So when you have people that think they're not really part of society and they think that they want to go out here and kill police, or they want to kill police, they feel like there's not really going to be any kind of punishment for them. You see, so that kind of makes them want to do it more. There's an incentive to do more of it because they feel like it's not really going to be a punishment. But let's keep going. And on 4th October and 13th of October 2016, an individual allegedly shot at 2 different police stations in Indianapolis, Indiana. The subject left a handwritten note at the scene of one of the shootings in which he identified himself as a Moor and made anti-white statements. The subject posted pictures on social media of African-American men carrying assault rifles behind text calling for social injustice and retribution. The subject was later involved in a shootout with police during his arrest on related charges, according to law enforcement reporting. On 17 July 2016, Gavin Eugene Long ambushed and shot 6 law enforcement officers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, before eventually being killed by police. The deceased victims included 1 African-American officer and 1 white officer from the Baton Rouge Police Department and 1 white officer from the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office. Long had expressed black separatist rhetoric on both social media and in his manifesto, including rants against crackers in reference to an African-American male killed by police in Baton Rouge on the 5th of July 2016. That was Alton Sterling. In his manifesto, Long expressed his frustrations with police and criminal justice system in the United States and saw his actions as a necessary evil in order to create substantial change. A law enforcement search of Long's laptop contained biographical information and residential addresses of 2 officers involved in the Alton Sterling shooting, and Google search directions to one of the officers' home address. Long had also declared himself to be a Moor, had changed his slave name to the Moorish name Cosmo All-Star Seddon Penra, and was carrying a Moorish identification card at the time of his death, according to open source reporting. Yes. See, Gavin Eugene Long, he was into a lot of different things. He was not just a Moor. I think at one point he might have been a Nation of Islam. This guy was just lost and trying to find something that he could kind of latch on to. And that's the danger of these BIEs, as they call them, the Black Identity Extremists, and the groups that they are spawned from. These groups give people that are lost some kind of meaning of direction in their life. And it also kind of like promotes a false sense of intellectual superiority. You get into these groups and they start teaching, they start giving you books and stuff like that. You feel like you're more knowledgeable than the average black person, especially, but you're also more knowledgeable than the police officers themselves. So when you get pulled over, you feel like you got the upper hand. You feel like you can kind of out talk them and do whatever you want, say whatever you want, and not get locked up. And then you start to harbor feelings of resentment towards white people. And then that becomes hate. And then that kind of spirals out of control. And the rest is history from there. So yeah, it's really a big problem. And I saw that in this guy's, he had some kind of podcast on YouTube, and you were able to see what he was going through then. You were able to see how he was just sliding into a really dark place, but let's keep going. On 13 September 2016, an individual reportedly intentionally drove his vehicle toward 3 white police officers within the police department in Phoenix, Arizona, outside a gas station, striking 2 of them before he was arrested. The subject's social media accounts indicated that he was tied to a BIE group and a Moorish group, and that he was angry over police shootings since at least the killing of Michael Brown in 2014. That was in Ferguson, Missouri. That was the whole hands up, don't shoot, this, that, and the third. Consistent with BIE statements on social media, the subject stated the Caucasian needs to be slaughtered like the pigs they are, and right along with the niggas who serve and protect them, according to law enforcement reporting. On 21st November 2014, a BIE was arrested and eventually convicted for purchasing explosives the subject intended to use in the Ferguson area upon release of the grand jury verdict for the police officer involved in the shooting death of Michael Brown. He previously discussed a desire to kill the white St. Louis County prosecutor and the white Ferguson police chief who were involved in Brown's case, according to the FBI information. Additionally, the subject had ties to a BIE group that had discussed ambushing police. Furthermore, the subject had ties to the sovereign citizen movement, filed paperwork declaring himself an Aboriginal, Indigenous, free, sovereign Moor, and possessed a Moorish identification card, according to open source reporting. Yep. So I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that so many of them had this common thread with the Moorish science, sovereign citizen stuff. I'm gonna go back up here and read this about Moorish science, or the Moorish sovereign citizens. Moorish sovereign citizens are a loose network of mostly African Americans who believe they are sovereign entities who do not recognize the authority of the U.S. government. Moorish sovereign citizen ideology derives from the Moorish Science Temple of America, a nonviolent religious and cultural movement founded in 1913 by Noble Drew Ali, who taught his followers they were not Negroes but Moors, people of North African, Berber, and Arab descent, which they are not, but I digress. Some Moors adherents adopt sovereign citizen strategies to assert diplomatic immunity by claiming membership in a fictitious Native American tribe, claiming descent from settlers who arrived in North America during a pre-Columbian era, or identifying as foreign nationals and ambassadors. Yeah, that's what they do as well. They think that they were here first, that they did not come on slave ships, so they're not part of the United States. They have their own little nation. Yeah, they talk about that a lot. That's very common. I've been hearing about that for many years. Perspective. BIEs have historically justified and perpetrated violence against law enforcement, which they perceived as a representative of the institutionalized oppression of African Americans, but had not targeted law enforcement with premeditated violence for the nearly 2 decades leading up to the lethal incidents observed beginning in 2014. BIE violence peaked in the 1960s and 1970s in response to changing socioeconomic attitudes and treatment of blacks during the civil rights movement. BIE groups such as the Black Liberation Army, BLA, which was created in the early 1970s, take up arms for liberation and self-determination of black people in the United States, engaged in murders, bank robberies, kidnappings, racketeering, possession of explosives, and weapon smuggling. From 1970 to 1984, the BLA was involved in at least 38 criminal incidents, including 26 armed assaults, 3 assassinations, 4 bombings, and 4 hijackings and hostage takings. Almost half of these attacks took place in predominantly African-American neighborhoods and targeted law enforcement officers without regard to their race, according to an open source database. BIE violence has been rare over the past 20 years, and there is sparse evidence of any convergence with SCEs who adhere to Moorish beliefs, who have historically engaged in nonviolent fraudulent schemes, including the production of fraudulent personal identification documents such as the International Motorist Certifications. I've seen those a lot. I think old girl had that. I think that was a girl that had got shot by police and she didn't want to come out of her house. I'll place a link to the video I did about that in the description box below. Passport, vehicle titles, and registrations and birth certificates in support of their claims of sovereignty. In addition, although non-Moorish SCEs have committed lethal violence against law enforcement in the past, this violence has typically occurred in response to encounters with law enforcement, for example, during traffic stops or the issuing of warrants, rather than through premeditated, targeted aggression. In addition, not all self-identified Moors are sovereign citizens, and not all sovereign citizen Moors engage in violence against law enforcement or other illegal activity. The FBI has previously reported on BIE retaliatory violence against law enforcement in 2 products. This intelligence assessment addresses actual incidents of lethal retaliatory violence. The previous Black Identity Extremism intelligence products discussed calls for potential retaliatory violence, not actual violent incidents. Recent lethal violent incidents may be indicative of a resurgence of targeted violence within the BIE movement. Of course, the FBI considered the alternative hypothesis that retaliatory violence against law enforcement is not ideologically motivated, but rather a result that some individuals may simply harbor animosity toward police and exploit racial tensions as an excuse to commit acts of violence. The FBI, however, assesses this alternative is very unlikely in the cases analyzed in this assessment because strictly criminal subjects typically commit spontaneous defensive acts of violence against police rather than proactive targeting, and use idiosyncratic reasons unrelated to ideology, such as financial gain and personal disputes, to justify their actions. The FBI further judges that it's very likely BIEs proactively target police and openly identify and justify their action with social political agendas commensurate with their perceived injustices against African Americans, and in some cases, their identified affiliations with violent extremist groups. Outlook. The FBI says it is very unlikely that BIE's perceptions of unjust treatment of African Americans and their perceived unchallenged illegitimate actions of law enforcement would inspire premeditated attacks against law enforcement over the next year. This may also lead to an increase in BIE group memberships, collaboration among BIE groups, or the appearance of additional lone offenders motivated by BIE rhetoric. The FBI further assesses it is very unlikely additional controversial police shootings of African Americans and the associated legal proceedings will continue to serve as drivers for violence against law enforcement. The FBI assesses it is likely police officers or minority groups are also targeted by BIEs because they are also representative of a perceived oppressive law enforcement system. Possible indicators for BIEs posing a violent threat to law enforcement include advocating for violence against law enforcement. You know, pigs in the blanket, fry 'em like bacon. We all heard that. That was not something that was done in jest. We all know what that was. Violent anti-white rhetoric, you know, kill cracker, honky pigs, you know, like, hey, that's the whole thing right there. They talk about pigs being white people and police. Attempts to acquire illegal weapons or explosives and affiliations with others in both the BSE and sovereign citizen extremist movements. Yes. My thoughts about this. I think this was a very well done report. I think they pretty much included everything. A lot of what they said in this report, I've been saying for a very long time about these black extremist groups. You know, I did not really see them name Black Lives Matter. I don't think they name Black Lives Matter at all. But Black Lives Matter is most certainly part of what's going on here. Michael Xavier Johnson talked about Black Lives Matter specifically. I remember the police officer, I think it was the chief of police, if I'm not mistaken. I'll put the actual thing I'm talking about in the description box below. But the officer was saying that Michael Xavier Johnson was upset about Black Lives Matter. Right. And there's other people that have acted on behalf of the rhetoric that Black Lives Matter pushes. The guy DeRay McKesson was talking about, oh, we know we've been watched for a very long time. Matter of fact, let me see if I can find this here. They know they've been watched for a very long time and it's not anything new. This, that, and the third. Yeah. See, that's the guy right there, DeRay, with the Stay Woke shirt on. And you see what he says here. DeRay McKesson of Black Lives Matter told The Guardian that terrorism report echoes the days when the FBI tracked activist groups, including the NAACP and those that oppose wars. We know that we're likely being watched. This is a confirmation that the work of social justice continues to threaten those in power, blah, blah, blah. And you know, you got Darren Wilson, all these people. Look, at the end of the day, these groups are very dangerous, extremely, because when they feel like they could do whatever they want, they're not really part of the United States. And there's always an axe to grind against the white man. And even those that are just supportive of America in general, black folks too, because you saw Gavin Eugene Long, he killed a black police officer down there in Baton Rouge. So it's not just about white folks. It is about them, but it's about everybody that even supports what they think white people support, which is just, you know, America going forward as a positive place, as a place where laws actually matter, where you can't just do whatever you want to do. Right. So that's pretty much all I got to say. So what say you? Do you think this report was pretty much on point? Had you been thinking a lot of what this report has said? Do you know more than what the report said? Do you know more than what I said? Whatever your comments are, let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.